Kia ora koutou. Welcome to what is our second interview with a practitioner. And today I'm joined by Sally Wallace. Where are you based, Sally? I forgot to ask you that.
While I work for Enable New Zealand, which is based in Palmerston North, my home base or my work base is Wellington. Okay. So this working from home is nothing new for me.
So to introduce Sally, she's been an occupational therapist for about 20 plus years. She's been an OT for Enable for about plus 10 years in the area of wheelchair and seating. She's a professional advisor for all of Enable New Zealand, and she recently completed a postgrad rehabilitation course at Otago Uni, and she's been involved in telehealth for about 3 or more years, and she did actually present at one of the clinical workshops that for OTNZWNA about telehealth, and was signaling at that time that the profession probably needed to catch up with some of the technology that's out there and using it. So welcome everybody, and particular welcome to Sally. We're just going to roll through some, well, basically have a conversation predominantly around the use of telehealth. So if I can start there, tell me about how you use it.
Thanks, Andrew. We currently use it now as part of our wheelchair and seating outreach service. It first came to light when, for a number of things, when our travel had been disrupted. So generally our flights had been cancelled. We had to cancel appointments, but still needed to continue with the service. Generally, these clients and the therapists had been waiting up to a couple of months to be seen by us. So we introduced telehealth through that way, where we would continue our appointments that we had made either via telephone to begin with, or starting to use Facetime. And we've progressed to Zoom as well. Occasionally we may be asked to help or see someone in their environment, but they live in rural New Zealand, so it might be somewhere like Ruatoria or Westport or way down in Bluff. I think we may have even done one on Stewart Island, where the cost effectiveness of actually getting there to see one client can be a hindrance. So we have used telehealth to be able to support the assessor doing their job and be able to help them with the funding application, that is derived for us by the Ministry of Health. So how long
have you been using sort of assessment?
I think it's probably been about 3 to 4 years now since we do that. We have used it as well just for meetings. If there have been a number of therapists involved with clients and we needed to have a discussion about where to from here or how it fits in with funding, more often than not, I would sometimes suggest how about we use FaceTime or Zoom so you can actually physically see each other. I do find that it helps with conversation, it makes it more personal, and it's an easier way of getting to solutions or results quicker than just going back and forth via email.
Okay, so what application or platform do you use when you're connecting with clients and undertaking an assessment?
The main two that we use are FaceTime, which is an application that's available to Apple users, and Zoom. Where we have used it prior to COVID-19, there has been generally either a specialised assessor or the primary assessor with the client, possibly a subcontractor or a supplier. So if the assessor hasn't or the client doesn't have the availability of those tools, the supplier or the subcontractor have. So between those group of people, either of those two platforms have worked well. Slightly different now with the COVID-19 situation, where now we don't have as much access to people who are used to using it for work. What we've been doing is when we've been helping is finding out, even just from the assessor, from my role, my first Port of call is always the assessor, not the family or the client. And I have asked them what they have. General rule of thumb, outside of understanding what your local DHB or business policies are around communication, privacy, consent, and all that's required to know to use this type of service delivery, I ask them what they're familiar with. Generally, people are using technology like this to communicate with family and friends. So whether that's overseas or someone else, so finding out actually what they're comfortable with is probably the first step.
Right. Just for clarification, FaceTime, which a lot of people use, is an Apple product, and it doesn't work on non-Apple machines. Is that right?
Yeah. That's my understanding, yeah. So I generally ask people what device they have. Another one which I haven't personally used, but others have, and it's not an Apple product, is Google Duo. Yeah, but generally we've used, or I use FaceTime or Zoom. I haven't had an issue as of yet, but there will be issues out there where either a client, a family, or a supplier or subcontractor hasn't got one of those things loaded onto a particular device.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned consent earlier, and I just want to pause there and just understand the consenting process for somebody who you are remotely communicating with over the internet. How do you manage that process?
Yeah, so I think for our assessors, they need to understand the local DHB rules and policies around consent. What we do is ask the person, are they happy to use Telehealth as a service delivery? Because that's all it is. It's just a different way that we are delivering our services. Instead of doing it face-to-face, we're doing it over video. So just getting their consent as well. I have never filmed or recorded anything. That is a whole different level of consent if you are keeping material. It's a bit like with photos. You may get consent to provide or perform an assessment, but if you were taking photos and storing them, that's a different level of consent. So same with Telehealth, there's a consent for asking if we can speak as we are now, but if you're recording anything or taking photos from the service delivery, that's a different level of consent, and you need to be able to obtain that. If it's consent for talking, then it's just something that we note in the notes. If it's consent for taking data, then generally that needs to be at a level that the DHB has requested as part of their normal policies.
Thank you. And in relation to, just for, again, my understanding is, you talk about an assessor, a client, and yourself. So is this a three-party conversation that happens? Is the assessor with the client?
Yeah, so again, prior to COVID-19, the assessor would be with the client. That's the way that our service runs. So my job, the Ministry of Health has given us the job to be able to support the assessor. The client and the family are always the outcome, but our job is to support the assessor, so they are always there. We're helping them. The client is not our personal client, it's the assessors. With COVID-19, we have, I'm just trying to think of the ones that we've done recently. The therapist has been out to see the client as part of the COVID-19 essential criteria. So they have been there. We have talked about and looked at ways of being able to do telehealth with an assessor in one area, the client in their home, and myself here in Wellington. So that is still a possibility, as long as the client and the family have the capabilities of being able to do that. You can pair it back though. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is just via speakerphone.
Right.
Like a version of service delivery of telehealth is still just using good old speakerphone, which we have done before. So we can still do that.
Yeah. And again, we hear, well, there seems to be some confusion about what group of professionals are identified as essential
Mm.
services. So you mentioned that some of your assessors have been seen as essential services for clients. How did you get over that hurdle, or how did you seek clarification, confirmation that that is in fact, OTs who are assessing people for wheelchairs or seating are an essential service?
So the ones that I have been involved with have been families or clients that are being discharged from hospital, or are in a very precarious situation at home where their safety is of grave concern, and there is concern that they may need to go into hospital if we can't intervene. So that decision has been made by the local assessor, and from my understanding, from what I've seen and talked to, they generally get support from their managers around that. We've had a couple where we've been trying to work through solutions, and actually at the end of it, we've identified that this doesn't meet the Ministry of Health essential criteria for the COVID-19 situation. So we're developing plans to then be able to put in place when lockdown is lifted, or if that person's situation changes and they do meet that essential criteria. So a lot of them are involved either discharged from hospital or needing to go into hospital. Some of the ones have been, in fact, all of the ones that I've been involved in have been known, or the referrals have been known to the assessors, and they have been urgent referrals at the time, just before COVID-19 came into place.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So here we are, COVID-19 has happened, a lockdown has happened. People are still requiring an assessment of a wheelchair or seating. How do you practically manage that with this situation of a lockdown where I'm assuming the assessor cannot go to the client's home to make the assessment? Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to identify whether we need to do something urgently. So is it a COVID-19 situation? Do we need to look at getting a solution in within the next 3 or 4 weeks while lockdown still is around? And we actually need to talk through that whole process, because identifying a solution with the assessor and the client and actually putting that into place can be two different things, because there has been some challenges around freight of equipment, especially larger equipment like beds and power chairs. So we need to be actually, if we are doing an assessment, ensuring that the practical side of getting that solution to the client exists. So at the moment, we're almost case managing that from the start to the finish. So that's one way, that's one situation that we're working with. The other situation is, yes, a referral has been put in place. It's important, it's essential from the client's perspective, but doesn't meet the Ministry of Health essential criteria. You can still start assessing that client. The initial assessment work on gathering information, setting goals, all of that can be done via Telehealth. I think you have, again, within that scenario, two scenarios: a client that you know already, they're known to your service, so you have a whole lot of information, so it's about extending that, where are they at now, what's not working. And then you have a whole new client that's come into your service where you don't have that background information. So I think people need to have a think about what they can do now and get prepared for when lockdown is up and we can go out into the community and meet these clients, and I suppose then complete assessments. It is challenging to non-existent to be able to do a physical mat assessment via telehealth when you don't have someone local there to be able to direct them. So it can be done to a degree if, for example, if it was at your place and there was a local assessor there, you can guide them through that scenario to get a really good idea. It's still not the ideal face-to-face service delivery option, but it's doable.
So the assessor, if they can't go to the client's home, but the requirement is seen as essential to avoid them going into hospital or to support them coming out of hospital. How often do the assessors actually use telehealth to make that home assessment of, for the client coming to the home situation, assessing wheelchair, seating, bed, whatever it is they need?
Yeah, up until now, it's not been something that's used often. I think in some rural situations for some services, regardless of their funding, whether it's ACC, Ministry of Health, it has been done. It's about gathering as much information as possible. There is a couple of documents out there that Enable New Zealand and Seating to Go have put in place, and they can be found on both of those companies' websites respectively, on taking photos and how to do some basic measurements with just family or whānau that is there. So you can gather information that way. I think it's important to understand, though, that information needs to be looked at again after lockdown is up. So there's we're starting off with short-term solution scenarios that need to be revisited during lockdown. It is really difficult to get, if I'm just thinking of the Ministry of Health criteria, that long-term solution in place if you haven't been able to physically lay your hands on a client and do those proper measurements. Yeah, so it's having an understanding of what you can do for the short term and then following that up and finishing parts of that assessment for the long term. You definitely can start a funding application with the minimal information in respect to measurements and what you are after from a goal perspective, and identifying what the problems are and possible solutions. And then that can be finalised as we go out of lockdown. And our team are always available to be able to help through that process.
So, Ministry of Health and ACC are quite big bureaucratic organisations. And I'm just wondering, the responsiveness for equipment, how have assessors and how have you found that responsiveness?
I can't comment on ACC. From a Ministry of Health perspective or from an Enable New Zealand perspective, and sorry, I can't comment on Accessible either, we've had some challenges. A lot of the challenges have been around freight. So the staff are there, the processes are in place to be able to provide equipment, and we have changed our processes around to be able to help that as much as possible. We are working very closely with suppliers to be able to get equipment out. The larger items have been causing some delays. I think in the majority of the ones that I have worked with, and I can only comment on those, we have managed to come up with some solutions to get products to places. Our stores are open and we are providing equipment from them. Again, parts and things like that we need to get hold of. The smaller items are a lot easier to get out there. I think what we've been finding is actually the therapists that we're working with is coming up with a solution A, B, and C, and seeing what we can get in and what's ideal, and then having a plan alongside that of how we manage that once lockdown is up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So how are you, in your experience, which you've been using telehealth now for a good while, how have you found clients taking to it as a medium for communication and assessment or support?
We've had quite positive feedback. There is hopefully by the end of the year there'll be another paper that's published around this that Fee Graham is doing at Otago University that I've been a part of, and that involved clients' feedback and their input into that paper. But from a personal perspective, I do find that families take to it quite well. In today's world, they're used to using this type of stuff to, or most of them are, not all of them, but a good amount of families are used to using video conferencing or video camera work through their social networks, whether it be Facebook or Messenger, Instagram, all of those types of things, so they are familiar with it. I find that families are appreciative that their therapists and the systems that are around them are looking at different ways for them to be assessed and to have their needs progressed. I know when we have used it because we've had our flights delayed because of weather or scenarios similar to that, families have been very happy that there's been a plan B, I suppose. And I think what has been a plan B in the past will hopefully slowly maybe move to be more of a plan A, and we can use telehealth, especially for some of that postcode lottery side of things that we do get in New Zealand because of our rural nature.
Yes.
So I personally see telehealth being thrust at people in the unusual way that it has with COVID-19. There's silver linings to that.
Yes. Okay. What about the older age group? Do you find I'm paraphrasing and sort of generalizing terribly, but the older technophobe, how do you manage that client group or that client?
So pre-COVID-19, they've generally had a support person there to help them with the technology, so that hasn't had to sit on their shoulders, that responsibility. And I have found that they've quite enjoyed the process. I think with the way that COVID-19 is, and there would have been some families who have had to take that responsibility of trying to work it out themselves, and I imagine that would have been very stressful. How I tend to do it is I actually talk to them about what they're comfortable with, and it's not even with clients, it's actually with some of our assessors as well who aren't used to using the technology. I find out where their level of comfort is, and that is where we start. Because if we are putting clients under stress before the assessment even happens, then you're not going to be getting the information that's important for us to be able to do our job. So finding that level of comfort of where they're at, and if that's, I do find that some people are quite happy to be able to take photos and email them to you. That's something, again, they do with family and friends. So working out where that comfort level is and move from there.
Okay. Practitioners themselves, how have they taken to using telehealth? How have you found that?
I worked with one lady the other day who had never used it, and I was working with her in a different capacity to the wheelchairs and seating outreach. And she was needing to go and see a client through the COVID-19 essential criteria. And I suggested to her telehealth, and could we be involved with coming and helping at that point. It was quite an urgent scenario, and she identified that she had never used it, but within 5 minutes of talking her through it, she had a device that it could be used. She was able to use it, was very comfortable, and in fact rang me back using that device to let me know that there had been a change of circumstances and we needed to change the time for the appointment. So I think people cope if it's given to them in the right way, yes. Like anything.
Yeah, that's important, I guess. You mentioned a silver lining for telehealth, which has been caused by COVID-19 and the lockdown. How do you see telehealth developing in the future? There's two parts to this question. How do you see it developing in the future? And what would your advice be to a new graduate who's about to exit the program?
I think telehealth will be something that we will use more. I think we will use it with clients in their homes. And like I said, the ideal for me is that we can reduce that postcode lottery concept of rural clients not being able to access certain services. especially specialty services, more often just because of where they live. Telehealth, like I said, it's a service provision tool. I don't expect it, especially in wheelchair and seating, to take over that face-to-face appointment and the physical requirements for mat evaluations and assessments, and being in someone's people's home and being able to listen to their stories face-to-face.
Yes.
The idea is not that it takes over that, but it is something that we can use alongside. And I'm hoping that DHBs will see the benefit that their therapists have had by being able to use it. And I'm sure many therapists have probably been pushed into using it with some of their own tools. And I'm hoping that DHBs at some stage will see the benefit of being able to put some funding into tools that their assessors can use.
Yes.
In the community.
An important interface, isn't it, between using the tool and not losing that important face-to-face communication, the picking up of nuances, the developing of a sustainable relationship, which can only happen when you're face-to-face with somebody. We would hope that it would augment, telehealth would augment that, not take it over. Yeah,
and research that is out there points that out. And from my experience, that is the case as well. It's something that we use alongside, not instead of.
Okay. Finally, my final question around what advice would you give to a new graduate exiting the program in relation to telehealth in the future?
To embrace it, and I think it will be easy for the new grads to do that if that's how they start their careers, as this is an option. I'm sure there's a lot of thought that needs to go into supervision around our new grads with using this as a tool. And that's something, for our profession to look into. If it's not already done that, it probably has, because telehealth's been used in areas outside of equipment for a lot longer. I mean, it's something, we started off using our own tools for it before our workplaces come on board and saw the benefit. The tools can be expensive, but I think if you show your workplace how it can benefit, then workplaces do get involved. From an equipment perspective, having something that is portable so that you can see, so either a phone or a tablet, so that you can see different angles. You can walk around the house or outside the environment, because we use telehealth extensively at Enable New Zealand for housing outreach as well. I think that is an essential tool, as to having that portable side of things. Learn about it. There's lots of information out there now, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. To everybody out there, this interview will be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll provide a link on our website to that YouTube channel. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Andrew.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for talking to us. Ka kite anō.
Thank you.